Hello, I've been looking for the best lightweight 3-season 2-person tent that allows 2 people to sleep on 25-inch pads in comfort, and this has not been as easy as it sounds. Also, I decided to make this video primarily to practice on the video editor, but I thought maybe somebody would get some benefit from it, so here it is. For those family and friends that are normally watching this channel just to see news of what we're doing, this isn't it. You could probably move on by. Now, our application for this is going to be long section hikes on the AT, maybe some shorter through hikes, bar term trails, something along that line. What we're not typically doing is car camping. We are not doing day-long backpacking trips too often with heavy weights and things like that. So lightweight is very important to us. Now, because of that application, my criteria for this tent is that it has to accommodate 2 25-inch wide sleeping pads because I hike with my wife and both of us sleep better on 25-inch pads. It has to be lightweight because I don't want to carry a lot of weight on a long trek. And so I prefer something that is less than 30 ounces or about 850 grams in weight. The tent, I don't want it to be sil nylon. Sil nylon sags when it's wet, and it also tends to absorb water and get heavy, and again, I don't want to carry the weight. I would prefer a tent that sets up with fewer stakes because typically it sets up faster and I don't want to carry the weight of the stakes. And I am again looking for a 3-season tent, not something that's going to handle gale force. Might have to be a little bit more careful in my site selection, but that's a price I'm willing to pay for lightweight. Now, the tents that I considered included products from Gossamer Gear as well as Durston. Both of these companies claim that their tents will accommodate 50-inch pads. However, they list their widths at its widest at 48 inches. So that was a little cause of concern for me. In addition, I noticed on the trail that the Durston tent has at least one person with the tent wall right above their head, or the roof of the tent right above their head. Which is kind of similar also with the Gossamer Gear. Gossamer Gear also uses a narrower foot end than it has at the head end, so you really have to use a mummy style, which isn't that big of a problem. However, it also kind of limits how you set it up. At the end of the day, because of the size of the interior of these 2 tents, they didn't really become a serious consideration. 2 tents that do meet the basic criteria that I'd put out are the Zpacks Triplex, nominally a 3-person tent, as well as relatively new tent. This is the Tarptent Dipole 2Li. There are many videos on YouTube discussing the Zpacks Duplex and the Zpacks Triplex. They're essentially the same tent, just one's wider for being a 3-person tent. And there is a channel called Backpacking Life that, if you search for it, discusses the feature set of the Tarptent Dipole 2Li in exhaustive detail, and I'll reference you to that. However, what I'm going to discuss is why I think that the Dipole 2, spoiler alert, is a better 2-person backpacking tent for trekking, or at least I hope so. Quick check of the specifications that are important to me shows that the Dipole 2 is regrettably about 5 ounces heavier, or about 146 grams heavier. The opportunity to weigh the Triplex out of the box is long gone, but when the Dipole arrived, I did put it on my scale and weighed it at 28.9, including the label on the inside. Later I did weigh it again, but at this point I had made some modifications that I'll talk about later. The Triplex bathroom floor is rectangular in shape and a little bit wider than the Dipole, which also has an hourglass shape, so it's a little narrower at the center than it is at the edges. I took my Triplex out, set the poles to the recommended 48 inches, and measured from where the bathtub floor is square over to the other side where the bathtub floor is square. And I was getting just a little over 52, maybe 52.5 inches there. So it's a little lower than the 60 inches advertised by Zpacks, so I'm not sure where the discrepancy comes. I did the same thing over on the Dipole, and on the ends of the Dipole I was measuring 57 inches, a little bit shorter than what's stated on their website. Similarly, when I went and measured in the center of the Dipole between the trekking pole to trekking pole, I'm getting about 48 inches, so not quite as wide as advertised. However, at least in the dipole, you can see it still has plenty of room for an X-Lite regular wide and an X-Therm wide long, 78-inch long pad. The floor length of the triplex is nominally about 4 inches longer than the dipole, but I neglected to actually take a measurement when I had it set up. The pack size is also pretty comparable. The dipole's on the left, triplex on the right, obviously not the original packaging anymore. The price is just eye-watering. We have a duplex, we have a triplex. We have used the triplex on many trips to the Gila Wilderness, Superstition Wilderness, 1,000 miles on the AT. The triplex itself probably has 1,500 miles or about 2,400 kilometers. But there are some things with the material as it can degrade from sun, abrasion, folding, you get little pinholes in it. And although it's fine now, we are concerned that it may fail in the future. And we do have some trips planned, so we don't want to deal with that. So we were looking for a tent, perhaps the triplex, but then again, also something else that maybe would correct some of our perceived deficiencies in the triplex and maybe improve our experience. What deficiencies did the triplex have, at least in our opinion, that we would like another tent to correct? Well, let's compare and see how it will work out. One of which was leaking. When we first got our triplex years ago, it leaked out of the box. We went for a car camp trip in the rain and it gushed inside there. Unfortunately, we had a car nearby. We sent it back to Zpacks. They were very good. Sent back another one. It leaked, not as bad. We were short on time for some trips, ended up seam sealing it. And after that, it hasn't been a problem, but I very much resent having to seam seal a tent that's taped and that we're paying that much money for. So we're hoping that the dipole should, quite out of the box, not leak. Having learned our lesson, we took the dipole out on a car camping trip where we could escape, and the rain was predicted to go on for 8 to 10 hours. Ended up being a steady drizzle, and originally we were concerned about these vents at the head and foot end, that perhaps that they would leak, but we didn't see any leaks there. It seems like the rain will come down and follow the ridge line. If it does get onto that mesh, it kind of drips down the mesh, a little bit like a rain gutter that uses a chain to guide the water. A little bit of a leak seemed to be coming out of this corner. It dripped down and then pool. Later inspection suggests that the leak may have been due to needle holes from the stitching. I put a little length of repair tape on it. Haven't contacted customer service yet. I want to see how the tent does in more weather. Another thing about this tent is if you pitch it high on the corners, there's your foot box when you weight it down with your foot or whatever. And you can see that backsplash can come into this, or just spray. When we had misty kind of clouds going on the Appalachian Trail, that mist was coming right through those little corners and you get wet on the inside. In contrast, the ventilation mesh for the dipole sits above the ground a little bit more and also can be blocked off by this panel, so backsplash is less likely to be an issue unless you leave it open. The dipole also prevents backsplash from coming in by putting in these little triangular panels at the corner. Triplex also has a well-documented issue where you can shove the wall of your bathtub floor past the exterior edge of the roof of your tent, allowing rainwater to directly flow into the bathtub. This usually happens at night when you least expect it. It is perhaps a little easier to see how that might happen from the outside. The dipole, too, doesn't have the same unprotected mesh border for condensation that can be pushed out and exposed to the elements. So this method of water ingress into the tent can't happen. Though the triplex does have some pull-outs that allow you to raise that roof a little further, you can see how somebody who's 6'2", like myself, can get his head right up against the edge of the bathtub floor. And sitting on a X-Lite that's 72 inches long, with a 10-degree quilt on the other side is pretty close to rubbing up against the wall on that side. A little bit of motion at night and any condensation that's on those walls is going to start soaking your head or your feet, and has. Dipole 2 may be nominally a little shorter, but you can see it appears it's got a lot more space because of that vertical wall. I'm sitting on a 78-inch long X-Therm, and on the other end, kind of hard to see here, but the ends of my quilt are not hitting the edge. Not a whole lot of room to clear, but it's not hitting. It's been a minor issue, but the bathtub floor of the triplex is only attached to the roof by the netting. It kind of floats, so it can shift around on the ground if you're pitching on sloped ground. Whereas the edges of the dipole 2 are actually strapped in to where the stakes are holding the tent securely. I'm hoping that that means that the bathtub floor is not going to slip around as much. Don't have a whole lot of time on the tent. We were able to take it out on a 4-day backpacking trip to the Coosa Backcountry Trails and Duncan Ridge Trails here in Georgia. We didn't get rained on, unfortunately, but we did have some observations about the design and then also made some modifications because of the experiences with the tent. The end poles feel light and delicate and a bit concerning, but they can be replaced by trekking poles in a pinch. It's clear that the netting around the edge of the triplex allows a clear path for condensation to pass out of the tent and not get onto you. And I'm not as clear at what will happen with the dipole when condensation is heavy on the inside and whether it'll be able to get out of the tent quite as easily, but time will tell. The ventilation panel on the dipole is only secured at the top in the center, and in high winds and rain we were wondering if water would be blown inside the tent. High walls are not ideal for wind, and both the dipole and the triplex have fairly high walls and are trekking pole tents, so site selection isn't very important, but I suspect that the dipole is going to be a bit more sensitive than the triplex because of these flat ends on the head and foot. The dipole needs 4 stakes minimum and 8 for best stability versus the triplex, which needs 8 and 12 respectively. However, you have to add your own lines on the end, probably help the weight spec for Tarptent. You can stake out the doors for added vestibule space, and Tarptent includes this little hook that's hooked on backwards. You have to flip it, and then that allows you to stake out that little line and hook the door. I've nearly lost this already about 3 or 4 times because it's a loose piece, and I really didn't care for how it was hooked up. So I chose to replace the ridge line on this with a Zpacks configuration. Used a Zpacks dual hook, allows me to hook the loops on both sides of the door, maybe reduce some of the stress on the zipper. Something that was an annoyance for me and made me change all of the lines were these small little loops. They're very hard to get off the stakes. They do, however, include those nice Easton Nano stakes, not the MSR Groundhog, the red one. And in those 4 stakes, or with those 4 stakes, they include this Dyneema sack. So which tent will be better? A little bit early to tell. The dipole has the leak that I guess is a draw with the triplex. I had those annoying line changes I felt like I needed to do. And it includes that 21-inch pole on the end that may be a little bit delicate or fiddly, something else to fool with. On the other hand, those 21-inch poles give you some beautiful vertical space on the ends, the head and foot, and that gives so much feeling of space inside of that tent. It feels much, much bigger than the triplex when I'm inside of it. Also, having those vents at the head and foot end allows you to view out the head and foot end. While we were camping, a turkey came walking through our camp. It didn't know we were there, I think originally at least, and we were able to look out and see it as it went by, not just on the doors, but also at the head and foot end. So that was a lot of fun as well. With it, it has a lot of ventilation. There's ventilation at the ridge line, ventilation at the head and foot end, and of course you can open up the doors. I think it's actually got a little bit more ventilation than the triplex allows at that point. And the last thing, of course, is if I don't have to worry about pushing out a foot box and I'm not getting the backsplash in a heavy storm, I'm hoping I'm not going to spend rainy nights curled up into a fetal position, desperately hoping that I'm not going to push my foot box out into the rain and soak myself and have a miserable experience. Sleeping through a rainy night would be a nice thing for me. Well, it's early days yet, and despite some of the disappointments with the Dipole 2Li, I'm pretty sure it's not going back to the manufacturer unless something else comes up, of course. Very interested to put it through its paces on the trail, and I think my wife and I are both going to be enjoying this, maybe even a little bit more than we enjoyed the triplex. Hope this video helped somebody out, and thank you for watching.